The hotel lobby was quiet that afternoon. The sky outside was cloudy, and light rain tapped softly on the big glass windows. Most guests were sitting with their coffee, some reading newspapers, others scrolling on their phones. The gentle hum of conversations and the clinking of cups filled the air. Near the far corner of the lobby, a large black piano sat quietly. It was clean, polished, but untouched. Most people walked past it every day without noticing it. It was just part of the furniture. A man entered through the side door. He wore an old coat that looked warm but faded, and he carried nothing with him. No suitcase, no briefcase, not even a phone in his hand. His name was Daniel. He looked to be in his late 50s, maybe early 60s. His hair was turning gray at the sides, and his face had the kind of tiredness that doesn't come just from age but from memories. Daniel walked slowly across the marble floor, his eyes scanning the room. Nobody seemed to recognize him. It was exactly how he liked it. He walked toward the piano like it was calling him. His steps were soft, careful. When he reached the bench, he sat down slowly, letting out a quiet sigh, as if he had been holding his breath for years. He rested his fingers gently on the keys. They felt cold at first, and unfamiliar. It had been years. He didn't even know if he still remembered how to play the way he once did. But there was something in him that needed to come out. Not with words, not with shouting, just with music. He closed his eyes and pressed the first key. The sound was soft, pure, and a little sad. He pressed the next, then the next. A slow melody began to rise. It wasn't any famous tune. It was something from inside him, something he had never written down. His fingers moved gently, carefully. The music came slowly at first, like a shy child, and then began to grow bolder. His hands moved more freely now, dancing across the keys with a rhythm that felt both practiced and new. People nearby began to turn their heads. A woman looked up from her laptop. A man paused mid-sip of his coffee. Two kids who had been playing near the elevator stopped and stood still. Something about the sound made the room feel different, like the air itself had become softer. The rain outside had grown heavier, but inside, there was only the sound of the piano. Daniel didn't notice the people watching. His eyes were still, closed in his mind. He wasn't sitting in a hotel lobby. He was somewhere else, somewhere long ago. He was remembering a room filled with sunlight, a young girl laughing, a wooden piano, and a small living room. He was remembering the days when music filled his house, and joy had not yet been taken from him. A little boy walked over and sat cross-legged near the piano. His mother tried to pull him back, but he shook his head and pointed at Daniel's hands. The mother gave up and stayed behind him, also now listening. More people came. A couple who had been arguing outside the coffee bar walked in and stopped talking. Even the hotel staff began to peek from behind the front desk. Daniel's fingers moved faster now. The music began to tell a story without words, a story of loss, but also hope. He played like the piano was the only thing that could understand what he had been through. His back was slightly hunched, but his hands were alive. They told everything he could never say out loud. The tune changed again, becoming brighter, lighter. Some people smiled. Others closed their eyes and just listened. The lobby, once filled with noise and movement, had become completely still. Nobody was speaking. Nobody was moving. Everyone was frozen, caught in the web of the sound, and still. Daniel played on. In the corner, a man whispered to his wife, "Do you think he's a professional?" She shook her head slowly, unable to speak.
Well, something about the way Daniel played.
Didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a conversation with his past, with the room, with something invisible. Behind the reception desk, a young hotel worker named Mia watched carefully. She had seen many people come and go, celebrities, rich business people, loud tourists, but this was different. She pulled out her phone to take a video, but stopped. Somehow, it didn't feel right. This wasn't meant to be recorded, was meant to be felt. Daniel kept playing, but now his eyes were open. He noticed the people around him, but didn't change a thing. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't showing off. He just kept his hands moving, the music flowing like water from an old fountain that had been dry for too long. A few feet away, A woman in a hoodie and jeans walked in. She looked tired, like someone trying to hide from the world. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she wore dark glasses. She had no bags with her, just a small notebook tucked under her arm. She paused when she heard the music. Her steps slowed and her eyes fixed on the man at the piano. She stood there, not moving, as if trying to be sure of something. Then slowly, she walked forward. Nobody noticed her at first. All eyes were still on Daniel. But a few heads turned as she came closer to the piano. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She just walked to the bench, standing just beside him. Daniel looked up, startled, but didn't stop playing. She reached out one hand and placed it gently on the keys beside his. Her fingers waited a moment. Then she began to play a quiet harmony that matched his melody perfectly. It was like they had practiced it together 100 times. Yet it was the first time. Daniel looked at her, his eyes wide now. His hand slowed for a second, then caught the rhythm again. They played together, each one listening to the other, matching, shifting, building. Now the crowd was truly still. Something magical was happening. One of the older guests, a woman in a purple scarf, gasped. She whispered, "Is that her? Is that Amara Levin?" The name passed through the room like a wave. Amara Levin, the young piano genius who had disappeared from public life 2 years ago after the tragic loss of her brother. She had vanished completely. No concerts, no social media, no interviews. People thought she had given up music forever. But here she was, beside an old man in a hotel lobby, playing like her soul had come home. Daniel didn't say anything. He just kept playing. Amara looked at him and there was something in her eyes. Recognition, maybe even guilt, or gratitude. But she didn't cry, not yet. Their music changed again, this time lifting higher. The notes flew fast, dancing together, like birds in the sky. Each time one hand led, the other followed. Then they switched. It was not just music now, it was healing. Everyone watching felt it. Something real. Something rare. When the final note came, it floated through the room like the last breath of a dream. Then silence. Nobody clapped. Not at first. It didn't feel like the right thing to do. Silence felt full, not empty. Then a single pair of hands began to clap slowly. It was the little boy sitting on the floor. His claps were soft but sure. Others joined in. Soon, the entire lobby was clapping, not loud or wild, but gentle, full of respect. Daniel and Amara stood up. They didn't bow. They didn't smile. They just looked at each other and nodded. Then they walked together to the side of the room, away from the crowd, and sat quietly on a couch. Their conversation was private. Nobody could hear it. But their faces said enough. Behind the desk, Mia finally whispered, "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." And even though the piano was now quiet again, the music lingered in the air. In the hearts of everyone who had been lucky enough to witness it, the soft clapping had stopped, but the silence that followed was not ordinary. It felt thick, like a quiet filled with something powerful. Something that had touched everyone who had just witnessed what happened at the piano. Even the air in the lobby felt warmer now, as if the music had changed it somehow. People were still standing in place, staring at the piano or at the two strangers who had just shared something too. Deep for words, Daniel and Amara were now sitting on a couch. Near the large window, away from the center of the room, neither of them was smiling, but neither looked sad either. They both looked like they were remembering something private, something heavy. More people entered the lobby from the elevators in the street. The news had already begun. Spreading throughout the hotel, there's a man playing the piano and a woman joined him at Something You Have to See. Most guests didn't know the names. They didn't understand the full meaning. But they felt it in the music. A few of the hotel workers were whispering among themselves. Mia, the young receptionist, was still behind the front desk, her eyes wide, her heart racing. She had never seen anything like this, and in her heart, she felt that something important had just happened. Something more than just a piano performance. An elderly man with a cane approached the piano and touched the keys gently with one finger. Then he smiled quietly to himself and walked away without saying anything. His wife joined him, holding his arm. "That was something else," she whispered. Like a story being told without words. The little boy who had clapped first was now sitting again near the piano. His mother crouched next to him and said, "Do you want to learn to play like that?" The boy nodded without taking his eyes off the keys. The moment had touched him, even though he was too young to understand all of it. Back at the couch, Daniel looked at Amara for a long moment. She looked back, but neither of them spoke at first. Their silence wasn't awkward. It was like two old friends who didn't need to explain everything right away. "You haven't changed," Daniel finally said, his voice low and rough like an old book being opened again after years. Amara gave a short laugh. "That's funny. I feel like I've changed too much." Daniel shook his head slowly. "Not in the ways that matter." There was a pause. Amara looked out the window. The rain had stopped, and thin sunlight was trying to break through the clouds. It made the glass look like it was glowing. "I didn't think I'd ever touch a piano again," she said softly. "And yet you did," Daniel replied. She turned to him, her eyes tired but open. "I didn't plan to. I was just walking through. I didn't even know it was you sitting there." Daniel looked down at his hands. They were shaking slightly now that the music was over. "I didn't know it was you either, not until you played the second note." "Second? The first one was you. The second one was us." Amara felt something move inside her chest, something warm and painful at the same time.
Oh.
"You still speak like a poet," she said quietly. He gave a small smile. "Only when I'm speaking to someone who listens like one." Their words were soft, but they carried weight. People nearby were still watching them from a respectful distance, but they could not hear the conversation. It didn't matter. The music had already spoken for them. A man in a suit approached me at the reception desk. He was a hotel manager, tall and serious. "Who are they?" he asked. Mia hesitated, then said, "The man, I don't know exactly. But the woman, she's Amara Levin, the pianist."
Nice.
The manager's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "Ed, I've seen her before, and I know." The manager didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "Don't disturb them, not for anything." Amara leaned back on the couch and closed her eyes. "It's strange. I spent the last 2 years avoiding pianos. Then today, I heard you're playing, and I couldn't help myself." Daniel looked at her carefully. "You ran away from music after what happened? I understand, but it never really left you, did it?" "I tried to let it go," she whispered. "I really did. I thought if I stayed away from the piano, the memories would stop hurting. And did they?" "No," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "They just got quieter and heavier at the same time." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's the thing about music. It's not just sound. It's memory. It's feeling. It's everything we try to hide." Amara opened her eyes and looked at him. "How did you know to come here today?" "I didn't," Daniel said. "I just felt ... pulled. I was walking past the hotel, and I saw the piano through the glass. Something told me I should go in." Amara smiled for the first time, though it was a small one. Maybe the piano was calling both of us. Daniel leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. "Do you remember the last time we played together?" Amara's smile faded. "Yes, that concert. 2 weeks before the accident." Silence fell between them again, but this time it was heavier. The memory hung in the air like smoke. "He would have loved today," Amara finally said. Daniel nodded. "He was proud of you. I was proud of him," she said. "He had such joy in music. He didn't care about being perfect. He just played because he loved it."
"That's what you did today," Daniel said, looking at her. "You didn't
play for applause. He played because he had something to say." She wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. "I'm scared to go back." Daniel didn't ask where. He knew she meant the stage. The world. The place where everyone watched, expected, judged. "Then don't go back," he said gently. "Go forward. One step at a time. Start where you are." She looked at him again, this time with something like hope in her eyes. A woman approached. them carefully holding her phone in her hand. "Excuse me," she said softly, not wanting to break the mood. "I just wanted to say thank you. I haven't felt anything this real in a long time." Amara nodded and gave her a quiet smile. The woman didn't ask for a picture, didn't ask for an autograph. She just walked away, holding her heart. Daniel stood up slowly. "Come," he said. "Let's get some air." They walked out of the lobby into the courtyard behind the hotel. The rain had stopped completely now, and the ground was wet and shining. A few birds hopped along the edge of the flower beds. The air smelled fresh, like new beginnings. They sat on a wooden bench under a small tree. For a while, neither of them spoke. They just listened to the world around them, the breeze, the distant sounds of traffic, the light tapping of drops falling from the leaves. Then Amara said, "Do you still teach?" Daniel shook his head. "I stopped when you stopped. Couldn't bear to sit at a piano after. After everything." Amara looked down at her hands. "Maybe it's time we both go back. Together." He turned to her, surprised. "Are you saying?" "I don't want the stage," she said quickly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I want to play again. I want to teach. I want to feel music again without the fear." Daniel nodded. "Then we'll do it quietly. No lights, no noise. Just sound." They sat there for a long time, side by side. And in that quiet moment, something inside both of them shifted. The pain was still there. The memories would never go away. But the music had returned. And with it, something else, a reason to begin again. Inside the hotel, people were still talking about the moment they had seen. A few had taken short videos, but most had put their phones down. It wasn't something that needed to go viral. It was something to remember. The piano sat silent again, but not empty. Everyone who passed it now looked at it differently. No longer saw a piece of furniture. They saw a story, a moment, a miracle. And somewhere in the city, two people who had once lost everything to silence had found each other through sound. The next morning, the hotel lobby was once again filled with its usual sounds: footsteps, soft voices, the click of shoes on marble floors, and the occasional ringing of a phone. Yet something felt different, like the room remembered the music. From the day before, the piano stood quietly near the corner, untouched, but no longer unnoticed. Guests glanced at it as they passed, some smiling gently, others pausing a little longer than before. The memory of Daniel and Amara's duet still floated in the air. Mia, the young receptionist, arrived early. She walked past the piano and stopped, to rest her hand on its surface. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the moment the music had begun. It still gave her goosebumps. The video she had seen online posted by another guest was already gaining attention. The comments were filled with people asking, "Who are they? Is that really Amara Levin? Where can I hear more?" But Mia hadn't shared the video herself. She wanted to protect the moment. It wasn't just a performance. It was healing, real and raw. Some things didn't need to be shared with the world by mid-morning. Few guests had started gathering near the piano again, as if hoping it would come to life like it did yesterday. But Daniel and Amara were nowhere in sight. Some people wondered, if the moment was gone forever, a once-in-a-lifetime scene that could never be repeated. But in a quiet hallway near the hotel's garden, Daniel and Amara sat in a small private lounge. It was peaceful there. Daniel had a notebook in his hand, and Amara sat with her legs tucked under her, sipping tea. They had been talking for hours about music, about life, about everything they had hidden for years. "I still can't believe we ended up in the same hotel at the same time," Amara said, her voice soft with amazement. Daniel smiled. Maybe it wasn't a coincidence. She looked at him curiously. "You think it was fate?" "I don't know if I believe in fate," he replied. "But I do believe music brings people together, even when they're lost." Amara looked down at her fingers. "Yesterday, when I touched the piano, something inside me woke up. Like I found a part of myself I thought was dead." Daniel nodded. "I felt the same. I didn't realize how much I missed it until I sat down. I sat in silence for a while." The sound of birds came from the garden outside. Sunlight fell through the windows, making little golden shapes on the floor. Suddenly Amara said, "I want to play again." Daniel looked at her. She was serious. You mean today? She nodded. Yes. Right now. Daniel raised an eyebrow. In the lobby? Why not? She said. Yesterday it wasn't planned. But it became something beautiful. Let's not be afraid. He chuckled softly. You always had more courage than you realized. She stood up and offered her hand. Come on. Let's make the piano speak again. Daniel took her hand and stood. Together, they walked quietly back through the hallway. As they entered the lobby, a few people noticed them and began whispering. Phones were lifted again. Eyes widened. Amara ignored it all. Her eyes were only on the piano. Daniel sat down first and played a soft opening note. Ow. The sound floated through the room like a greeting. Amara joined him seconds later, her fingers falling into place beside his. This time, the melody was playful, like a conversation between old friends. Their music laughed, paused, teased, and danced. The crowd in the lobby grew. People stood near the entrance. Others peered from the balcony above. But still the energy stayed calm. No one shouted. No one pushed forward. Everyone respected the moment. As the melody built, something incredible happened. The hotel staff, even the strict manager, brought chairs and cushions for people to sit. They made space. Daniel and Amara were smiling. Now, fully lost in the joy of sound, the music became faster, lighter, like spring wind through trees. A child near the front clapped quietly in time with the beat. His mother gently hushed him. But Amara saw and smiled. Then the music changed again, slower, deeper. It began to tell a story again. Not one of sadness, but one of growing, learning, finding strength.
I'll meet you.
Each note felt like a step forward, each. Harmony like a gentle hand offering help. Somewhere in the crowd, a young man with a guitar strapped to his back wiped a tear from his cheek. A woman who had been silently reading a book closed it and placed it on her lap, suddenly unable to look away from the piano. The duet ended with a long, soft chord, held just a second longer than expected. Then silence again. This time, the applause came slowly but with deep feeling. It was not wild or loud. It was honest.
Ow!
People stood not to cheer, but to say thank you with their hands. Amara looked at Daniel and whispered, "We need to do something." "What? Do you mean?" he asked. "Let's hold a small concert here. Nothing fancy, just us. Maybe this weekend. Can invite guests and let them sit on the floor if they want." Daniel looked thoughtful. "Do you think the hotel would allow it?" "I think they already would," she said, glancing at the manager, who was now smiling and clapping. They stood and walked over to the reception desk. Amara leaned forward and asked, "Would it be possible to arrange a small music evening here?" The manager stepped forward. "Slevin, we would be honored." Daniel looked surprised. "Wait, you knew who she was?" The manager chuckled. "Everyone knows who she is. But we also saw something special yesterday, and we want to be part of it." Amara smiled. "We don't want lights or microphones or posters. Just a few chairs and a working piano. You'll have whatever you need," the manager said. Over the next few days, word spread quickly, not through advertisements or flyers, but through whispers, quiet conversations, and guests telling one another, something special is happening here. Daniel and Amara practiced in private. They met every morning in the small lounge behind the lobby, talking and playing, laughing, and remembering. The hotel gave them space. They didn't interfere. They understood now that this wasn't just about music. It was about healing. By Friday afternoon, the lobby had been gently rearranged. The furniture was moved to make space. Soft lights were placed around the piano. Guests sat on chairs, cushions, stairs, and even on the floor. Children leaned against their parents, held. Elderly couples held hands. When Daniel and Amara entered the lobby, everyone stood up not out of formality, but out of respect. They didn't bow or make a speech. They simply sat down and began to play. This time, the music was full of everything. It had pain, joy, love, sorrow, and hope. It reached into the hearts of everyone who listened and pulled out forgotten feelings. Some people wept quietly. Others smiled with wet eyes. Some just closed their eyes and let the sound wash over them. Each piece they played was chosen carefully. Some were new, born from their conversations that week. Others were familiar, like old friends returning to visit. But each one was played with truth, and when it ended, there was no rush to leave. People stayed, sitting together in silence. Some approached Daniel and Amara to say thank you. Others just placed a hand on their heart and walked away quietly. Later that night, back in their private lounge, Amara said, "I think this is what I was meant to do now."
Me too.
Daniel said. "No big concert halls, no stress, just music. That matters. And students," Daniel added, "young ones, who want to learn from the heart." Amara smiled brightly. "Let's start something. A school. Space for real music. For healing. For truth." Daniel nodded. Together they clinked their teacups like a toast. A new chapter was beginning. Outside, the piano sat alone again. But it wasn't silent anymore. It carried every note played that week. And it waited, knowing it would be played again, not just by fingers, but by hearts that had something to say. 3 weeks had passed since the quiet concert in the hotel lobby, but people were still talking about it. The hotel had never felt the same since that evening. Something beautiful had settled in the air, like the sound of soft music that never truly ended. Even the hotel staff walked with lighter steps now, smiling more often. The guests, even if they were new and hadn't witnessed the performance, felt a calm warmth when they entered the lobby. Daniel and Amara had not left the hotel. What began as a chance meeting had grown into something neither of them expected. They weren't just playing music anymore. They were building something. Something real. Every morning, the two of them met in the small lounge behind the garden. The room had been turned into a temporary studio, with a second-hand upright piano moved in, stacks of music sheets, notebooks full of ideas, and a whiteboard, where they had written a name at the top in bold letters, the listening room. It was Amara's idea. "This will be more than just a music class," she had said. "It will be a place where people can listen, not just to music, but to themselves. A place to breathe, to feel." Daniel had agreed. He'd spent too many years locked inside his pain, thinking music was behind him forever. But now, for the first time in years, he woke up with a reason to get out of bed, a reason to smile. One morning, a teenage girl named Lena arrived at the hotel with her mother. Lena was quiet, with large brown eyes and fingers that constantly moved like they were looking for something to hold. Her mother had heard about Amara's music and came hoping for help. Lena had stopped talking after her father's death the year before. She used to play piano every day, but she hadn't touched it in months. Amara agreed to meet her. She invited Lena into the lounge and didn't ask any questions. She just sat at the piano and began to play something soft, slow, like a lullaby. Then she gently slid down the bench and made space. Lena stood watching for a few moments. Then slowly, carefully, she sat beside Amara. Her fingers hovered above the keys, unsure. Amara didn't speak. She just nodded once, then closed her eyes and kept playing. Lena's hands moved. Just one note at first, then another, slowly like a bird learning to fly again. Within minutes, the two were playing side by side, a simple tune but full of feeling. Daniel watched from the door, his eyes wet. Later that evening, Lena's mother cried in the hallway. "She hasn't touched a piano in a year," she said. "She hasn't smiled in months." But today, she smiled. Spread quickly. Guests who had once come to the hotel for business or rest now began bringing their children, their old parents, or even themselves to learn, to listen, to heal. Some wanted to play. Others just wanted to sit in the room and feel the music. Daniel and Amara never charged anyone. They didn't advertise. They didn't record videos. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about connection. They began calling their work musical listening sessions. Sometimes it was one-on-one. Sometimes they invited 5 or 6 people into the room. Sometimes nobody came and they just played for themselves. One day, an old man in a wheelchair came with his granddaughter. He hadn't spoken since his stroke, and his family said he didn't respond to anything. Amara sat beside him and began to play a folk Tunan old song from the 1950s that she had learned from her father. Halfway through the tune, The old man tapped the rhythm with his finger. A moment later, he smiled. His granddaughter burst into tears. Doubt each day brought someone new. A boy with anxiety who found peace through drumming softly on the piano's lid. A woman in her 40s who hadn't sung since childhood but hummed along when Daniel played a lullaby. A teenage couple who argued constantly, but sat holding hands while listening to a melody that seemed to speak what words could not. Daniel and Amara knew. This was becoming more than they planned. They needed space. They needed instruments. Needed support. But they didn't want to turn it into a business. They were afraid money and fame would ruin the purity of it. Then one evening, as the two of them sat on the rooftop garden of the hotel, Daniel said, "What if we stayed here permanently?" Amara raised her eyebrows. "You mean I'll live in the hotel?" "Why not?" Daniel said. "They've already given us the lounge. We've helped their guests. They've seen what it's done for people. What if we speak to the manager and ask for permission to create a full-time program? A music space. A sanctuary." Amara smiled. The stars reflected in her eyes. "I think it's time." The next day they spoke to the hotel manager. He listened quietly, then surprised them both by saying, "We were going to come to you. We've already spoken to the owners. We want to support this." Within a week, the hotel converted a large, unused conference room into a music studio. The walls were painted warm colors, soft lights were hung, and rugs were laid down to soften the sound. Several people donated instruments: a cello, a violin, a guitar, and even a small harp. One guest left a handwritten note with a flute. "This belonged to my brother. He loved music. I think he would want it to live here." Amara and Daniel named the space the listening room, just like they had written on the whiteboard weeks ago. They added a sign outside with simple words: "Come, sit, listen. No experience needed." Soon people from outside the hotel began arriving. Friends told friends. A woman who came once returned the next week with her coworker. A young man who had never played before began visiting every afternoon just to watch. And one day surprised everyone by playing a song he wrote on his phone using just 2 fingers on the piano. Each person who came brought something special, and each one left something behind. Fear, pain, shame, or sadness, they dropped little pieces of it like heavy coats they no longer needed. Daniel found his purpose again in guiding, not instructing. He didn't care about scales or speed. He cared about expression. He'd say, "Don't try to impress anyone. Just tell the truth through the keys." Mara found peace in giving. She let go of the pressure to be perfect and allowed herself to be human. She laughed more. She cried when she needed to. She stopped hiding. One evening she told Daniel, "You saved me." Daniel shook his head gently. "You saved yourself. I was just playing beside you." They often played duets in the evenings with candles around the room and guests sitting on cushions. Sometimes there were 10 people, sometimes only 2. But every time the room felt full of life. And outside that room, the world continued as usual, busy, noisy, rushing, but inside the listening room, time slowed down. Music didn't fix everything, but it helped people breathe again. Mia, the receptionist, began taking lessons after her shift ended. She used to be afraid of performing, but after weeks of gentle support from Amara and Daniel, she played her first piece in front of strangers. Her hands trembled, but her smile afterward lit up the whole room. Lena, the silent teenage girl, began writing her own songs. She hadn't spoken a full sentence in almost a year, but one morning she sang a verse she had written herself. Her mother stood in the doorway and cried, hand over her mouth. As her daughter sang about light returning after darkness, Daniel and Amara watched it all quietly, never taking credit. They didn't need applause anymore. Their reward was the sound of healing at night. When the sessions were over, they would sit by the window, sip tea, and talk about the day. And sometimes, without a word, they would sit at the piano again, letting their fingers speak the thoughts their hearts didn't know how to say out loud. It wasn't about being famous. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being real, and that they both knew now was enough. The sun was setting slowly behind the tall buildings of the city. Its orange light fell softly across the windows of the hotel, painting golden lines on the floor of the lobby. It had been over 2 months since Daniel first sat down at the piano, alone, and so much had changed. What began as a quiet moment had become something much bigger, something that had touched the hearts of many people: the listening. People came not just from the hotel, but from all over the city. Some came from small towns, just to sit quietly and feel what the music offered. And it was never the same each. Session had its own soul, its own message, its own mood.
Daniel.
And Amara didn't plan most of the pieces. It followed what they felt, and somehow it always made sense. Amara had grown more open. Her laughter was now a familiar sound in the hallways. Children ran up to her, showing her their drawings, and adults sat beside her just to talk. Some still called her a genius. She only smiled and said, "I'm just a person who found her." Way back to music, Daniel had changed too. He no longer walked with the heavy weight he once carried. His shoulders were straighter, his voice steadier. The sadness in his eyes was still there, but now it lived alongside peace. He had found meaning again, not in concerts or awards, but in the way someone's eyes lit up after touching the keys for the first time. One night, as Amara and Daniel sat in the garden, she looked up at the stars and said, "I never imagined this is how my life would look, but I'm glad it does." Daniel looked at her and nodded. Sometimes we find the best parts of life after we've lost something important. The hotel staff had now created a schedule for the music sessions. Volunteers helped with tea cushions and setting up the room. Even the strict manager had relaxed. He often slipped into the back of the room and stayed longer than he meant to. He once confessed to Amara, "I used to think music was just sound. Now I know it's medicine." One afternoon, something unexpected happened. A famous reporter staying at the hotel asked to attend a session. He had heard whispers about a pianist who had disappeared, a composer who had returned, and a hotel that had quietly become a healing place. He promised not to bring cameras or crew, just a notebook. Daniel and Amara agreed, but only if he respected the space. He did. Sat in the back, barely moving. He didn't take photos. He only listened. And when the session ended, he left quietly, tears in his eyes. A week later, his article was published in a national newspaper. The title read, "The Room Where Music Brings People Back to Life." It told the story of the quiet piano in the hotel lobby. Shared how Amara and Daniel had created something special, not with fame or money, but with heart. It's the article. Didn't focus on their past pain. It focused on what they had built from it. After that, more people began to arrive. Not crowds, but seekers people, looking for peace, meaning, or simply a place to breathe. Some were musicians. Some had never touched an instrument, but all came with open hearts. Daniel and Amara were careful. They didn't let the attention change the room. Phones were still not allowed. There were no tickets, no posters, no videos. Only people, music, and silence. One evening, during a quiet duet, a woman stood up at the end and said, "This room saved my life." Nobody clapped. Nobody needed to. Her words were enough. Another man, a soldier who had returned from war, said after a session, "I haven't slept peacefully in months. Tonight I will." The stories kept coming. The room kept holding them. Mia, the receptionist, now helped run the room. She had grown more confident, even started writing her own music. She once said to Amara, "This is the first place I've ever felt truly seen." Lena, the once silent girl, now led a children's group every weekend. They made up songs together, silly, sweet, and sometimes sad, but every note was honest. One day a young man came to the hotel holding a letter. He handed it to Daniel and said, "This is from my grandfather. He was one of your students a long time ago." Daniel opened the letter. Had written, "You were the reason I didn't give up on music when I was young. Now my grandson is playing because I told him your stories." Daniel wiped his eyes. "Thank you for bringing this," he whispered. Time passed gently. The seasons began to change. Leaves turned yellow outside the garden window, and soft winds moved through the lobby when the doors opened. But inside the listening room, everything stayed warm. Not because of heaters or lights, but because of the people and the music. 1. Cold morning, Amara sat at the piano alone. Daniel was running late. She played a slow, thoughtful piece. The notes moved like snowflakes, falling, melting as they touched the heart. A small boy entered the room quietly and sat cross-legged on the floor. Then another child joined. It's then an older woman with a cane. They didn't speak. They just listened. When the piece ended, Amara looked up and smiled. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," the boy replied, his voice small. "Would you like to try playing something?" The boy shook his head at first. But after a moment, he stood up, walked to the piano, and placed his fingers on the lowest key. "Just one note is enough," Amara said gently. He pressed it. The sound echoed softly in the room. She nodded. "That was beautiful." The boy smiled, and something in the room glowed even more. Later that night, when Daniel returned, Amara told him what had happened. "That's the magic of this place," Daniel said. "Even one note is enough." One evening they sat together. Again in the garden, the city lights flickered far below. The air was cool, but not cold. "Do you think we'll ever go back to the stage?" Amara asked. Daniel thought for a moment. "We're already on one. It just looks different now." She smiled. "Yes, and I think it's my favorite stage." They didn't need thunderous applause or bright lights anymore. What they had found was deeper, real, gentle. They had built something with patience, pain and love, and that kind of music never fades. Eventually, other hotels and places began writing to them, asking if they could help build listening rooms of their own. Daniel and Amara didn't say yes to all, but they did begin writing a guide, Music for the Soul, with simple steps, tips, and stories, so others could create spaces of healing too. Their days were full, not of noise, but of meaning, and every time someone sat at the piano for the first time, shaking with fear, unsure of their worth, Amara would whisper the same words. Just one note. Start there. Somehow every time that note was enough, even when the world outside was loud and heavy. Inside the listening room there was peace, and it all started with a man who played the piano alone in a hotel lobby, and a woman who sat beside him, not knowing that the music they created together would change everything, not just for themselves, but for everyone who heard it.